So one day I decided to go to Walmart and get a can of Flex Seal and a few sheets of cardboard, and then I headed home to build a cardboard boat. I had the stuff and I was ready to build. I cut the sheets so I could form them into a boat. I then took my duct tape and I duct taped all around it. I then flipped it over and duct taped that side. I got the base for the boat and positioned it in. I put some duct tape on it, flipped it over again, and put another piece of cardboard on it for support. Now it was ready for the Flex Seal, so I took it to my backyard to be sprayed. I sprayed all around the seams and in every corner until I was done and ready to test it in the creek. Like for part 2. Part 2 of filling up a giant hamster ball with ball pit balls. So I had put 700 balls in, but it wasn't enough, so I went to Walmart and got 800 more. I put them all in my trunk and then went home. Set them all down, put them all in my hamster ball, and then got in and let it air up all the way. And when it was finally done, I went off the stairs and almost took out these flowers, but didn't and went on out into the road, where I slipped, and then I buried myself until I was no longer visible. Then I got up, ran for a bit, then I shook the ball around and jumped in it, and got back up and ran over the ramp. After that, I figured out these balls would race around the inside. Then I got up and decided to fall one more time, then got out and jumped on it. Full vid will be on my YouTube, Dylan Ayres. So one day I ordered a go-kart attachment for my hoverboard. I got all the parts out and then I looked at the instructions and tossed them. And after that I quickly realized I needed them, and then I started putting everything together. I finished it all up and then strapped it to my hoverboard and then got on it and drove out the door. I drove to the driveway and then through a puddle and then down the road and lost control. And then lost control again and hurt myself.
You sound like a whale.
I pulled it out of the ground and the hoverboard wouldn't work anymore. So I tried to fix it by tossing it. And when that failed, I got all sad. But then I had the thought, I'll just go to Walmart and blow all my money on a new one. So I got there, pushed the button, and then took it home. And then I put my go-kart attachment on it to ride it around. I kept riding, and then I also failed on a wheelie. And then I made my way towards a hill to go down it, and ended up losing control again and going into someone's yard and then doing it again. And then the next day, the broken one worked somehow, and I wheelied it and spun on it and finally drifted out. So one day I wanted to put a bunch of ball pit balls in my giant hamster ball. So I went to Walmart and got 700 balls, took them to my car, loaded them all up, and went home. And put them all in my hamster ball with the help of my brother. Then I got in and let it air up. Psh, until it was done. I splashed all the balls around, and then I headed off the stairs, into the driveway, and on out into the street, where I slipped and fell. I then jumped up into the balls, and then I wanted to hit this ramp, and I just ran over it. Then I went back onto the road, ran for a bit, then fell again, and made a snow angel, and threw some balls. I got back up and walked off. Then I shook the entire thing, and then went back on home, got out, got back in, then got out, fell on it, and used it as a beanbag. Like if I should do it again with more balls. So one day I went to Walmart to get the stuff to retry my failed cardboard boat attempt. I got a bunch of tape and a pretty good amount of cardboard. And then I left, went home, and started building. I first began by setting up one sheet and taping it down. And then I added a second sheet and used a lot of tape to tape it to the first one. After that, I connected the two with a final sheet of cardboard and used a lot of tape to secure it. Next, I folded down all the flaps with a bunch of tape to make it thicker and float better. Then I flipped it over to tape the bottom, and I also added the base sheet and taped that down too. I finished taping that and then flipped it back over to tape the bottom up, and also added another sheet of cardboard for more support. Then finished off the boat by taping up the entire bottom to waterproof it. And it was done and ready to be tested in the creek, like for part 2, or just watch the full video on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. So one day I wanted to make a giant paper airplane because my last one failed, so I went to Walmart, got some tape and some poster board, and then went home to start construction. I started by positioning 4 pieces together, and then I took some tape and taped them all together. Then I flipped it over and taped all the creases on that side. Next, I folded it in half, laid on it, and then unfolded it and folded all the little necessary folds in order to make the plane. I folded one side down, added some tape, and then folded the other side down and added some tape. Then I folded the plane in half and folded down one wing, and then folded down the other one. I added some more tape to it, and I was done. So I put it in my car and drove on out to a bridge to throw it off. It was kind of flooded, but I threw it anyway, and it totally failed. So I went down there, over a puddle, and into the woods to go get it. I got it out of the water, and it was totally destroyed. Like for part 2 for me to make a better one. Part 4 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands, and I've been adding a lot of rubber bands to it. And I said it would take 1 million likes for me to keep going, and it got 4 million. So I went to Walmart, got more rubber bands, and then left, went home, set them down, and opened them up. And then the next day I got on that rubber band grind, placing the entire pile on the ball. And when I was done, I left and came back again later to place another bag on. And once I finished that ball, it was pretty big, like the size of my head. I weighed it, and it weighed 5 pounds. And it also bounced pretty high, and made a decent basketball for my broken hoop. And after that, my brother wanted to play some bands, so I let him. But he gave up, and I ended up having to finish his pile off. And after that, I only had one more big pile left, so I dumped it all out and started placing them. I finished it up, and then started on the bag of thicker rubber bands. And now I'm out. This sucked a lot, and since the last post got like 4 million likes, it's going to take like 5 million likes now for me to keep going. So one day I went back to Walmart to retry my failed cardboard boat. I got Gorilla Tape, some duct tape, some cardboard, and bubble wrap. And then I headed home. I also ended up getting this cart because it was fun. I got home and started building my new design. It was going to be a lot more boxy this time, and my plan was to put 2 boxes together. I used Gorilla Tape to tape the seams of the boxes, and then I put them together. And then I flipped it over to tape the bottom. And after that, I cut out the middle piece that was inside the box. And then I covered the whole bottom of the boat in duct tape, and ended up using the whole roll. And then I covered it in bubble wrap so it would like float, I guess. And it was done. I'm running out of time, so part 2 tomorrow. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is the size of a basketball. And I was going to stop, but everyone wanted me to keep going, so I went to Walmart, got some more bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, and got back at it. I started by placing the pile of colored rubber bands because it's easier to place, and once I was done with that, I weighed it, and it was 12.9 pounds, and still bounced pretty high, and made a good basketball. Then I went to Walmart to get more colored rubber bands, but they were out, so I just got the normal ones and went home, dumped that out, and placed that entire pile. I finished it off, and it was now 13.4 pounds, and still the size of a basketball, and still bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going and just see how big I can make it. So I've been making this rubber band ball for way longer than I thought I'd be, and I'm just going to keep going. So I went to Walmart, and they were out of rubber bands, so I left and came back a few days later, and they had some. I went home, dumped them all out into a pile, and started placing them. And it's honestly just so satisfying to watch the pile go down. And when I was done, I left and came back later with a new bag that I ordered on Amazon. And the band seemed good, so I placed the entire pile until I was done. And it now weighs 23.6 pounds, is way bigger than my head, and it's really hard to throw, and even harder to make a basket with. But I made one. Like if I should keep going. Part 2 of putting a hamster ball in the creek. Don't try this at home or anywhere. So I walked in, and it was pretty strong and started to carry me away. It was pretty neat in there, but when I tried to stand up and run, I just fell. So I laid down, and then I got back up and tried again, but yeah, it never worked. So I just chilled and let the current take me, and then we came to this bridge thing, and my brother and my dad stopped me. But I couldn't quite run up to land, and it was kind of a problem. And then some other people helped push, and I made it up and ran off. And then my brother unzipped me.
Good job, Jack.
Whoa, my ears popped.
Part 2, putting rubber bands on a watermelon. So it exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands. So I decided to turn it into a rubber band ball with all the leftover rubber bands. I began by making the wad a lot neater, and I discovered this.
There's watermelon inside this.
So I did my best to get it out, and then kept making it neater, and then eventually started placing actual rubber bands on it. And after a while, I took a break to go shoot some hoops with it. And let's just say it's not a basketball, and I ended up breaking my backboard more than it was already. And then I waited till the next day at like 2 in the morning to start trying to place more rubber bands on it. I finished my pile and started placing another bag, and eventually I was down to the last one. And to be honest, it was a lot of time for very little difference, but I got another bag anyway and started placing them. I finished it up and I had a ball, I guess. Let me know if I should even keep doing this. Part 2 of floating down the creek in a hamster ball. So the current continued to take me away, and I eventually tried to stand up, but I just fell. And I just laid there, and the big current started to approach, and I fell again. I eventually tried to stand up again, and also fell another time, and just let the rapids take me away. And it was pretty fun, but eventually my brother pulled me in and I got out. I relaxed for a second and then began towing the hamster ball back upstream with my brother. And the cows were in the way, but eventually they moved, and we carried it to shore and on up into the truck. Cardboard boat part 2. So I picked up the boat and put it in the bed of my brother's truck, and then took it down to the creek, got it out, and carried it down. I put it in, the water was already leaking when I tried to get in, so I pushed it over to a ledge and tried to get in from there, but it just sank. And I tried to row in it, but it was just a fail. So then I got out, pulled it to shore, folded it up, and then took it home for repairs, like if I should try again. So one day I decided to prank my brother with fake spray paint on his truck. But I needed more, so I went to Walmart and got some. And then I started with the blue, just writing a bunch of random stuff and scribbling. And when I was out of that, I got to the orange, writing a bunch more random junk. And when I ran out of that, this side was pretty much done, so I switched over to the next side and finished it. And go ahead and like the video since I'm not making you wait for the reaction. And here it is.
This isn't a joke, right?
What'd you do?
What'd you do? This is fake, right?
It's real, bro.
This is real spray paint.
And when he touched it, I think he realized it was fake, so we pulled it out to the cul-de-sac and washed it. And then he tried to spray me. Yeah. So one day I ordered a human-sized hamster ball to run in the creek with. I took it outside, unboxed it, and unfolded it. I then plugged the air pump in and turned it on. And while it was filling up, I pulled all the folds out to make sure it filled up all the way. It was done, and I rolled it out to the grass and unzipped it, and all the air came out.
Air pump.
Yeah, I felt pretty dumb, but then I took it to my brother's truck to take to the creek. We got there, and I drank the Bang to have energy like a hamster. I got in the ball, and my brother started filling it up. It was pretty neat from the inside, and I liked the air. And then it was done, and I ran towards the creek.
Follow you.
I got in the water.
Whoa!
Like for part 2. So one day I decided to see how much a pawn shop would give me for my rubber band ball. So I got in my car and drove out to one, but it was closed for another 30 minutes. So I waited, ate a burrito, and then went back in and said,
I got this rubber band ball.
Okay.
I want to sell for $200.
Why do you think it's worth $200?
I put a lot of time into it. It's a lot of rubber bands,
How many rubber bands are in there?
like 14 bags.
How many is in a bag?
I have no idea. But it weighs 6.5 pounds.
Wow, does it bounce? Wow, bounces pretty good. Well, how old are you?
16.
You gotta be 18 before you can do anything with it.
and then he said he'd give me $100 for it if I counted all the rubber bands and had someone 18 sell it for me. So I thought about it and said,
200.
No, I can't go 200 on it, but it'd be worth just watching you count that many rubber bands for $100.
500.
I couldn't get $500 out of a rubber ball.
How much do you think you could sell this for?
$50.
I'm gonna have to walk.
All right. Appreciate you coming in.
So then I walked out with my rubber band ball, and I guess I'm just going to have to keep adding bands. So one day I decided to get a snorkel and a towel and head down to the creek to look for treasure underwater.
Come on, Bubba.
I set my stuff down, put my gear on, and then headed into the water. I looked around and found a rock. I kept looking with no luck, so then I put my phone on this thing to film underwater. And I kept scanning around underwater looking for stuff and eventually found this pair of sunglasses. Then I saw this flip-flop floating, and it was someone who was swimming over there, so I threw it to him. And then I began walking over to a deeper part of the creek to look for stuff. And I ended up taking off my snorkel because it was useless. Then I went back out, and after a while of looking, I found this pipe thingy. And I put it on my head as a necklace. And then I went back out, jumped in, and found this. Like for part 2. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it's getting pretty huge, and I'm probably not stopping. So I went to Walmart, got all the colored rubber bands they had, then went home, dumped out the bag of normal rubber bands, and placed that entire pile, which was kind of hard because of how big the rubber band ball is now. Then I took a couple days off and came back to place all 8 bags of colored rubber bands, which took a while, a long while, but eventually I finished, and it's huge now. It weighs 21.6 pounds and is a lot harder to throw and catch than it used to be, and almost impossible to make a basket with, like if you want me to keep going. Rubber band ball part 9. So a lot of people don't know that it started when this watermelon exploded and left me with this wad of rubber bands. And ever since then I've just been adding on to it, and this is the entire compilation up until now. And I needed more colored rubber bands, so I went to Walmart, but they were out. So I got gas and went to a different Walmart. But they were out too, so I went to another one and they finally had some. Then I went home, dumped out a bag, and then got busy placing the entire pile of rubber bands until I was done. And then I left and came back later. I dumped out the colored rubber bands and placed that entire pile. Then I found some more rubber bands in the floor, placed those, and then placed a bag of thicker rubber bands that I also found in the floor. And I was done. It now weighs 14.7 pounds, is the size of my head, and bounces pretty high. And it's also bigger than a basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I went to Walmart and got tinfoil to make a giant tinfoil ball like the ones I've seen people making on TikTok. I started with a small one and then began wrapping more and more tinfoil around it. And it looked pretty cool, like an asteroid. And I just kept wrapping it, and like a snowball, it just kept getting bigger. I continued to wrap it for quite a while, and it was beginning to look pretty cool. I finished it up, and then I took it outside to play basketball with it on my jankety hoop. And it stuck in the hoop, but I got it out and started playing with it. And not gonna lie, I was doing pretty good with it. I even made this long shot. Then I got it down, and while I was walking back, I shot from behind and made it. Yeah. And then it came down like a giant asteroid. So one day I got an air mattress, some cardboard, some tape, and I started making a cardboard boat. I started by taping one sheet of cardboard on the edge, and then I added another sheet on the end and taped it down. After that, I added one last edge piece and taped it down all around. Then it was done, and I picked it up and put it in my brother's truck, and we headed down to the creek and carried it down to go test it.
Dude, let's just sail off right there.
I put it in the water, and then I got in and started rowing. And I rowed out decently far.
Dylan?
But any further, I was headed for a current, so I made my way back. And then we both got in to sail, like for part 2. So one day I decided to take my 12.9 pound rubber band ball and see how high it would bounce off a building. But first in the street, and then in the hoop. And then I got a ladder and climbed up to the roof of my house with the ball to throw it off. I threw it off and it bounced pretty high and went into the yard. And then I tried to go up even higher to throw it off and just dropped the ball and almost took out my brother. And then I went down so I didn't fall off. I put the ball in my car and took it to a parking garage to throw it off that. I walked up there and tossed the ball off. Yeah, it bounced pretty high. And then I went back up all cinematic with the ball, ran around, and then I fell. But I got back up, took my ball to the edge and bounced it off. And then celebrated. Full vid will be on my YouTube. So one day I got an angle grinder and some paper to see what I could cut with paper. I glued 2 sheets together, cut it into a circle, and then I made the hole. After that I screwed it onto the angle grinder, picked up some fruit, plugged it in, and then I turned it on. And began cutting on the banana. And so far it was working. So I kept going, cutting further and further into the banana, until eventually I'd cut the banana completely in half. So then I started in on the grapefruit, but my blade was too broken. So I made a new one, screwed it on, plugged it in, and tried to cut the cereal box. But the blade flew off. So I made another one. Then I screwed it on, plugged it in, but the blade just flew off too. So I got mad, slammed the bucket, and then I walked off into a tree. Part 2 of making a giant paper airplane. So I made this giant paper airplane and threw it off a bridge, but it failed. So I went home, assessed the damage, and put it in the dumpster. Then I reviewed the footage and knew what I had to do. I went to Walmart, got more poster board, then went home, swept the driveway, and set all my stuff down to begin construction. I again started by placing the 4 sheets together, and this time I used Gorilla Tape and also used a different type of poster board. I folded the plane lots of times and just began making all the necessary, paper airplane folds while adding tape until I was completely done. And it was done and ready to be tested. Like for part 2 or watch the full video on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres later today. So I've been making this rubber band ball for way longer than I thought I'd be, and I'm just gonna keep going. So I went to Walmart and they were out of rubber bands, so I left and came back a few days later and they had some. I went home, dumped them all out into a pile, and started placing them. And it's honestly just so satisfying to watch the pile go down. And when I was done, I left and came back later with a new bag that I ordered on Amazon. And the band seemed good, so I placed the entire pile until I was done. And it now weighs 23.6 pounds, is way bigger than my head, and it's really hard to throw, and even harder to make a basket with. But I made one. Like if I should keep going. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and to be honest, at this point I'll probably never stop. So I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, then left, went home, dumped out all the colored rubber bands, and began placing them. Until I was done with the entire pile, which took a while. But I did it, then took a break and came back later to start on the pile of normal rubber bands. And I placed that entire pile covering all the colored rubber bands. So sad. Then took another break, came back and dumped out all the thicker rubber bands and began placing them until I was out. And the ball now weighs 19.2 pounds and is a lot harder to throw and way harder to make a basket with. Yeah, it's pretty big, so like if you want me to keep going. Part 5 of making a giant rubber band ball. So I've been making this rubber band ball and I ran out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. Got a bunch more rubber bands and then I went home, dumped 2 bags out, put some gloves on so I didn't break my skin again, and started placing the bands. And then left and came back the next day to finish off the pile. It looked pretty good so far, and then I forgot to video placing a whole nother bag. But it looks like this, and then I dumped out all the colored rubber bands and started placing them all on the rubber band ball. And I was done, and it was almost the size of my head and weighed 8.2 pounds. And bounced pretty high. And also made a decent basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I was just scrolling through TikTok and I kept seeing this apple bottle trend. So I drove to Walmart and went to the juice aisle to look for it. But there was none. So I left and went to a nearby Dollar Tree to look. And there was none there either, so I left and went to Target to look. And all they had were these big bottles that didn't crunch like an apple at all. And I bought the bottle I bit, cause germs. And then left, went home, and then went back to Walmart the next day to look again. And then to a neighborhood market that had them, or so I thought. I took them home, opened one up, and then bit into it. And it wouldn't crunch. That doesn't sound like an apple. I had got the glass bottles, but I drank it anyway, and it was pretty good, so I just kept drinking it. So one day I could feel in the air that a storm was coming. And I was right, there was a tornado warning, so I waited for it while I ate some beans, and then it rolled in, while my dad just sat in a chair watching it. It started to pick up and blow even harder, and it was pretty neato looking. And when I thought it was getting bad, I ran inside, grabbed my beans, then I ran out the door, and headed for the storm shelter. It was pouring down rain and I didn't know if my beans would make it, but we got there, I put it in, and then I ate them. And then I saw a spider. And that's my dog. And then we got out because we were probably overreacting and I ate all my beans, so yeah. So one day I ordered a giant water balloon. I tried to figure out how I was going to fill it up and then I thought, rubber bands. And then I began filling it up until eventually it started to leak. And I tried to fix it but failed, so I just had my brother hold it while I jumped.
No.
Yeah, pretty cool. Now here's the slow-mo. Wow. And it was broken. Like if I should do it again. So one day I decided to take my rubber band ball and a bunch of other random stuff to a pawn shop like I did before when my rubber band ball was a lot smaller. But now it's bigger and I'm back.
Oh yeah, it's a rubber ball. Oh, it's bigger. How many bands is it now?
I don't know. I brought some more items too. I made this in junior high, a one-of-a-kind CO2 card.
Did you win?
No.
Oh, it's a loser card.
He then looked at it and didn't want to buy it. So I showed him
This is
this.
a can of air.
It's about empty though.
Well, I used it a little bit.
And I said it was worth,
$50.
and he said no, so I showed him the next item.
I found this at an abandoned race car track. A genuine gold cup.
Then he asked why I thought it was gold.
It looks gold.
And he even tested it and found out it was stainless steel, so I brought out the rubber band ball.
It's probably the most famous rubber band ball you'll ever see. Its intrinsic value, probably $5,000.
How'd you come up with that value?
I just did.
He didn't want to buy it, but he gave me the good idea to put it on eBay.
Like eBay.
That's a neat idea. I might do that.
So then I left. Let me know if you think I should put it on eBay. Part 7 of making a rubber band ball. So I've been making this ball and it's pretty giant now and weighs 10 pounds. But I wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch of colored rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put my gloves on, and first finished off the pile of normal rubber bands that was already on the table. And once I was done with that, I dumped out all the bags of colored rubber bands and began placing them. I did this for quite a while, and the ball was finished, and it was huge. And it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is almost the size of a basketball. And it also bounces pretty high. And I also shot it in the hoop. And now I'm officially finished with it. It looks pretty cool. So one day I ordered an inflatable couch to float down the creek in. I unwrapped it and then let it air up and got on it. And then folded it into a couch and my dog got on it. Then we took it outside, put it in my brother's truck, and went to the creek. I sat by the highway and then carried it all the way down over the rocks and out to the water and out to the launching point where I pushed off. And it worked really well and was amazing. I continued on and then decided to lay down and just enjoy the ride. And then I almost ran into a tree. And I kept going out even further and waved goodbye to my brother. And before you know it, I was just gone, out of sight of anything but the GoPro. But eventually I came back and dragged it all the way back to shore, up the rocks, and into the truck, and all the way home. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and people seem to never want me to stop, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, and then went home to start placing them. I dumped out the little bags first, and began placing all of those until I was done, which took a while. Then I left and came back later to place all of the colored rubber bands, which took even longer, but now it looks pretty. I left again and came back to place the last bag of thicker rubber bands, and it was finally done. And it now weighs 17.5 pounds, is bigger than my head, and is pretty hard to catch when you bounce it. And now it's noticeably bigger than a basketball, like if you want me to continue this ball. So one day I went to Walmart and got some balloons, a helium tank, and some string. And then I headed home to tie a bunch of balloons to toilet paper and then send it off. Don't do this part at home.
Hi. Jack, oh my word!
Then I made my first balloon, and we were best friends. I drew a face on it to make it more real, and then we hung out. Yeah. But then I let go and it flew away. And then I went back inside to get busy. I started out by blowing up a ton of balloons and putting them on the ceiling, and I didn't know how many I needed, so I just blew up as many as I could until the tank was empty and I was on my last balloon. I'm going to take this toilet paper and this duct tape, some balloons, and I'm going to make it fly. Like for part 2 where I let it go. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it now weighs 8.2 pounds, but I want it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, then emptied out 2 bags of colored rubber bands, and got busy placing the entire pile. And after I finished the colored rubber bands, I dumped out 3 bags of normal rubber bands and placed that. I placed a bunch, but then left and came back the next day to place some more. It got tiring and I placed a lot of rubber bands, so I left, took another break, and came back and started on it again. I was sure to place the whole bag this time, but I got too tired and had to leave and come back again the next day to finish it off. So that's what I did, and I finished it up. And it was done. It weighed 10 pounds, was bigger than my head, and bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going. So one day I went to Walmart to get a Power Wheels, but they were too expensive, so I left and got this used Viper that needed a battery instead. I went to the battery store and got what I needed, then went home, screwed off the seat, then put the new battery in, and screwed the seat back on, and got on it, and took off. And drove down the driveway and into the road where it wouldn't move. So I gave it a little push, and then I headed for the ramp where I made a massive jump. Then I drove pretty fast down a hill, but the problem was getting back up the hill. And we ended up having to carry it, and then I put it in my car and took it out to the country to really open it up. I drove out to the road and floored it. Gone I went, and then I ended up crashing. And I got up and ran into the field, leaving behind my awesome Viper. So one day I decided to turn my brother's truck bed into a ball pit. First I taped up this hole, and then got all the ball pit balls from my hamster ball and dumped them out into the truck. Until eventually it was done and ready to take down the road. I jumped in it, laid down, and then just chilled. Then I got a GoPro and we headed out. And it was pretty cool, just moving along through my neighborhood in a ball pit. Yeah, and I just chilled there. And then some almost came out, but I got them. I just sat there, moved some balls around, and we went all out through the neighborhood. And at one point it was pretty shaky, but for the most part, the ride was pretty chill, and I even laid down. Then we went back home and I got out and threw my GoPro in. I put my hand in there and found it, and then we put all the balls back in the hamster ball. Like if we should do something else with all the ball pit balls. So one day I got a package, so I took it upstairs, sat it down, and opened it up. And it was the Mighty Mug I ordered. This cup is designed to never spill. I put some bang in it to test it out, and it still knocked over after I hit it, and threw a rubber band ball at it, and even placed it on the wall. So I took it to a different surface, and it worked. The cup would not knock over at all. So I started punching it, and when that failed, I tackled it, and tackled it again. And after that, I placed it in the middle of the road and then ran it over with my hoverboard. And then I threw a basketball at it. And let's just say the Mighty Mug wasn't looking so mighty anymore. I took a drink of it and then I threw it on the ground and walked off like a boss. Puh. So one day, my brother and I decided to go dumpster diving at a phone store. I looked in the dumpster and it was kind of gross. So my brother got in and looked around while I waited outside of the dumpster. After looking for a little bit, he found a screen protector, and he kept looking and eventually gave up. So I decided to get in and give it my shot. And I bent down to look inside a box, and inside was this.
What?
No way. I looked at it and then I got out and began to open it.
Alright, let's open it up.
Like for part 2. So one day I went to Walmart to get a bunch of bars of soap to make one of those satisfying soap videos. I went home, opened up one of the bars of soap, and got to cutting it. And it was actually working and looked so satisfying. It would just curl up and be a little strand. And then I cut it into a brick shape and cut all that, which was really cool. Next up was the green bar, and it was also really cool. So I made it into a brick also, and it was even cooler than the other one. A bunch of tiny stuff just scraped off. And next up was the dove, and I about chopped my finger off because it was so hard to cut. Then I mutilated this bar and totally didn't fake this knife throw. Whoa! Yeah. So one day I took a Power Wheels to a fast food place. I got in and drove on up after a lot of struggle. And then I pressed the button to order my food.
I would like a corn dog and a large tot. Alright, thank you.
Then a car drove by and said,
500. Thank you. My daddy bought it.
I then sat there, waved at the camera, then played with all the car's buttons. And eventually my food came.
A corn dog and then a large tot.
Yep.
Anything extra sauce.
Alright, thank you much.
Good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Then I drove away with my food, and I think this is going to become my new go-to vehicle. And it was a good corn dog. So one day I filled a giant hamster ball up with water and busted the zipper and all the water came out. Full vid is on my YouTube, but anyway, now I want to see if my hamster ball still works so I can put a hoverboard in and ride in it. So I fixed the zipper and then aired it up. I wanted to see if it would still hold its shape after having all that water in it. And after it was all aired up, it still did. So I pushed it over a bush and out to the yard to mess with it. I kicked it, and then I pushed it, and then I jumped on it, and then I jumped on it again. And after that, I deflated it and then got in it with my hoverboard to air up. And after a little bit, it was done filling up. So I picked up my hoverboard, walked out to the street, sat it down, and got on. And it worked. I spun around, and I also drove to the hill part to go down it. And I fell. But I kept going. And then I turned around and went back up and fell again multiple times. And then I headed home and really fell. So I got out
That was cool.
and drove off. So one day I wanted to see what I could cut in half with a power washer. I first got this broken ramp and it did nothing, so I got a stronger tip and it still did nothing. It also failed on ice cubes, but cut a banana clean in half. Then I got a piece of cardboard and cut it until it worked. After that, I took a piece of paper, folded it into a paper airplane, and sawed it right in half. Next, I got a plastic bottle that I ended up having to secure and cut. And it put a hole in the bottle. And next I tried a can and it did nothing until I went to pick it up. Next I tried a plastic ball, failed, and a tennis ball, which actually kind of worked. It took like all the fuzz off, and at the end, it was pretty mutilated. Then I decided to do my foot. Ha, psych. So one day I ordered all this stuff to make elephant toothpaste. I dumped out all the water, then added the first bottle, some food coloring, and the last thing, and it did nothing but fizz up a little. I guess I ordered the wrong thing. I kicked it and then blew the cap off. And then I went to Walmart to get the stuff to try again, and they were out, so I calmly left and went to a different store. And they sort of had what I needed. And I went home, added the peroxide, the dish soap, the food coloring, and the yeast. And just my luck, I think the container was too big, and it just foamed up a little. So I dumped it out, and then sang a new hit single.
Sometimes I don't want to be happy.
Then I touched it,
Elephants really brush their teeth with this stuff?
and bended it. Like if I should try this again. Part 3 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this water rubber bands. So I turned it into this actual rubber band ball, and now we're here and I'm out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. I got some rubber bands and then went home and emptied them out and opened up a bag. And got busy. But after a little bit, I left and then came back the next day. And finished off the pile. And then I dumped out 2 more bags and started placing them. But I got bored and ended up leaving and coming back again the next day to finish it all off. I placed rubber bands forever and then I went outside to test it out on my broken hoop. Yeah, it was hard to play with, but it bounced really high. Here's it next to a basketball. Yeah. After that, I went back inside to finish off the pile, and then I dumped out another 2 bags and started placing rubber bands for what felt like an eternity. And I was finally down to the last bag. I put them all on, and I was done. And it's pretty big, but it's going to take like 1 million likes for me to keep going. So one day I was on my phone, and I saw that everyone should stay inside because of an apocalypse or something. So I got up and went to my room to get a tent out of my closet. I grabbed the tent and headed downstairs. I got downstairs in the kitchen, and I grabbed a banana as my food for survival. I then headed out my back door, leaving behind my home and everything I knew. I was going to bug out in the woods with my tent. I walked around my backyard looking for a spot to set up, and I eventually found one. Dropped my stuff, and went to go set up my tent. I began building the tent, and I suck at building tents, so I was trying to remember what to do. After looking at the pieces and experimenting, I figured it out. I threw the cover on, and I had my tent built. I then crawled inside, zipped it up, and said, I'm gonna stay here until there's no more apocalypses. Yeah. Like for part 2. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and I'm just going to keep adding rubber bands every time Walmart restocks. So I went there, got a few more bags of colored rubber bands, then went home and started with the 2 bags I ordered on Amazon. I placed the entire pile until you couldn't see a colored rubber band in sight. And then I left and came back later to place the colored rubber bands I got at Walmart. And I placed it until I was done. It's huge and now weighs almost 26 pounds, is super hard to throw and really hard to catch, but I can still make a basket with it and even stand on it now. Well, kinda. Like if you think I should keep going. So one day I wanted to turn my brother's truck into a pool to drive down the road in. So I went to Walmart to get a blow-up pool to put in the truck bed. I got one, and then I also got a pool noodle. After that, we saw a pool that was actually designed for trucks, so we got that instead. And we got a donut and a water gun, and then we left. I walked out, went home, and then placed it in my brother's truck. Then I got my air pump and started airing it up. And after that was done, I got the hose and started filling it all up with water. It took quite a while, and while we filled it up, we simultaneously added hot tub water to make it less cold. Then I took the hose out, added one last bucket of hot tub water, and I was done. And I was just chilling on the floaty, and now my brother's going to drive down the road. Full vid will be on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. So one day I got my truck pull thing that I drove down the road in, full vid on my YouTube. And as requested, I'm going to take it down to the creek to float in. So I aired it up and then went down to the creek and carried it down. And then I put it in the water and got in it. And it felt kind of like a waterbed. I chilled for a sec and then I paddled out a ways with my stick. I was out pretty far and I got stuck. So I stood up, got out, and carried it over to shore. And then I carried it back over to the water, put it in, jumped in, and ended up just carrying it. Then I jumped in it again and pulled it the rest of the way back to land. I saluted the creek goodbye, and then I threw my stick in the water and went home. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it's pretty big now, but everyone wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart to get more bands, but they were out, so I went to a different Walmart and got some. Then went home, set down a pile of bands, and got busy placing the entire thing until it was done. And then I dumped out a few more bags and first placed the bag of smaller rubber bands and then the bags of thicker rubber bands until I was done with that. And it now weighs nearly 16 pounds and still bounces pretty high, but it's hard to catch now. And it makes a decent basketball. Like if you want me to keep going. So one day I wanted to make a cardboard saw like the paper saw I made. So I traced out a blade, cut it out, and then screwed it onto the angle grinder. And then I was ready to cut some fruit. I turned on my saw and started in on the apple. And it was working pretty well. So I kept going, and eventually I started in on the grapefruit, which ended up ruining my blade. So I took it off and made a new one from a cereal box. And then I screwed it onto the grinder and started trying to cut the cereal box in half. And it did pretty well and almost cut it entirely in half. And after that I started back in on the grapefruit, which ended up ruining this blade too. So I ripped the grapefruit in half and then threw it in the woods, and also threw the rotten apple in the woods. Cardboard boat part 2. So I picked up the boat and put it in my brother's truck along with an oar. Then we went down to the creek and I carried it down. Then I walked out to my launching point, got in, and pushed off.
Good job for you.
It was working. I kept on rowing and it eventually started to leak. But I still kept on rowing. I was approaching a current, so I rowed it to land and dragged it all the way back.
It worked.
I rowed in it some more, and then I drug it up. Full videos on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. So one day I wanted to put chalk dash lines all around my neighborhood like I saw this girl on TikTok do. So I went to Walmart and got some spray chalk and some regular chalk. Then went home and tried to make a stencil out of cardboard but failed. Then I tested out some spray chalk, and after that I measured the middle of the road and marked it. Then I tied some rope to a hoverboard to try to pull me, but it failed. Then I made it longer, and it still failed. So I tried walking, but that sucked. And I thought it'd be easier with some normal chalk, but it still failed. So I got out a hoverboard I thought was broken, and it worked perfectly. And when I ran out of one piece, I got a new one and kept going all the way until the end of one side of my neighborhood. I ran out again, but kept going and then was done. And then I went back home, got some more chalk, and went out to the other side of my neighborhood to get started. And I finished off the neighborhood and ran out of chalk. And then on the way home, my hoverboard died, so I had to carry it all the way home. And now here's driving before the lines, and here's driving after. So one day I decided to cartwheel across America. Well, like half of America. I cartwheeled way out of my neighborhood and on down into Arkansas, where I cartwheeled for quite a while until I made it to Mississippi, where I also cartwheeled for a while, but not quite as long. And then on up into Alabama, and then from there, clear on up into Florida, where my cartwheeling eventually got pretty bad. But the point is, I kept going clear on out to the ocean, and on into the water. Yeah.